Or not. Still going. Aha, we are live. Good evening. I'm Gloria, and this is Open Minds Chat Show. I am live from the Paradise Island, the Isle of Wight. Hence, the background is different. I'm staying at my lovely friend Emma's home. And I'd like to welcome, first time to Open Minds Chat Show. However, he has been on Inception podcast, the wonderful, lovely Charles Christian. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Gloria, for inviting me on. That's brilliant.
So, do you know the plan? I'm
Yep.
just going to say, give us a short bio. Tell us about you first, for anyone if they haven't heard about you before.
Right. Okay. From the very beginning, I'm an English barrister, but I haven't practiced for a long time. And then I went into the world of journalism, and I was a Reuters correspondent. I was also a technology journalist, and I won a National Newspapers Award for that. I'm an editor, an author, and I now am away from the dull technical day job stuff and pursuing writing about folklore, the weird, local history, ghosts, anything that intrigues me.
I'm with you.
And,
I'm with you.
and my books, there's a nice ebook on there for anybody who likes fiction. It's called Writing Genre Fiction. It's on Amazon Kindle, and it's called Creating Imaginary Worlds, The 12 Rules. I've got a book out called Haunted Landscapes, Shuckland, which is all about the ghosts, folklore, and legends of East Anglia. Got various other books floating around, but my next book, which is currently with publishers in America and will be out hopefully later this year, is a biographical dictionary, I suppose you'd call it, or almanac of witches and sorcerers. And we're looking at witches and sorcerers from ancient times right through to, from characters in the Bible right through to modern times. And they're all people who are supposedly historical as opposed to fictional. So,
Yeah, I'm with you.
You won't find Buffy the Vampire Slayer in there.
Oh, no. Charles, Buffy should have gone in there. Well, on that note,
She's not real.
Oh, no, stop it. I believe you spoiled it for me now. That's it.
Yep.
Seriously.
Goodbye. Okay.
You have a YouTube channel as well, don't you?
Yeah. I do YouTube.
I've watched quite a few of your little YouTubes as you've gone around.
Yeah, they're called the Weird Tales Show, and it's Weird Tales on YouTube. And I've been in a bit of a hiatus for a couple of months because it's been too cold to be standing around in fields filming. But we're getting back going, filming next weekend. And I say, free to view, lots of them up there, more coming. They're all in the 5 to 10 minute area. So
they are wonderful. For anyone that hasn't watched these, I did a good few months ago, and I became addicted. I found it fascinating, and learning about things that that you're never taught. And the fact that you go on site, you go around. I love the one that my favorite so far was the one in the church. Do you remember that one where you had a carving of a witch? Was it
the carvings of the witches? Yes. That's an interesting one. That's at Thurston, which is, or is it Thelneatham? It's in my book. Anyway, that's not very far from here in East Anglia, and it's a strange thing because they are quite clearly not your normal. It's the bench ends you get on pews in old churches. They're carved there 17th century.
Yes.
And obviously in the 17th century, this was when we had the Witchfinder General in this part of the world.
Yes.
And there was also a lot of other witch trials taking place at Bury St. Edmunds.
Which
And
makes it unusual, doesn't it, that they were there still to this day in the church.
they're still today, and I say they don't look like the type of statues you'd normally get. One of them is quite clearly showing a little bit of leg, which is unusual, and they're both holding animals. One's holding a cat, and I think the other one is holding an owl, something like that.
Yeah.
And I say they are definitely, they've always been known as the witches. And I say my theory is it was two witches who were arrested in Lowestoft, which is this part of the world, and taken to Bury St Edmunds to put on trial. And they would have gone past this place. And I think this was probably the influence. And, you know, in those days, people took witchcraft seriously. They took malicious witchcraft seriously. And they liked to make examples. And they would be, these carvings would be a reminder to people in that church that, you know, witchcraft is here and it's evil and avoid it.
I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm with you. It's a good job. It's a good job, Charles, that I'm not in the 17th century as a medium, because I would definitely be better to stay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think my unhealthy interest in it would also be damaging, because it was very much a view that if you knew about witchcraft, then obviously you were one, you know.
Yeah.
And
you would be burnt with me, Charles. That would be it. Okay, on that note, now we've got the segue through. You mentioned, and if you can, without giving too much away, your book that's with the publishers now, due to be released at the end of this year, which fascinates me, the topic. Could you share, before we go further, I know I've diverted you off slightly, but I did not know about this book, so I'm throwing everything out there. Could you give us an insight to what the book contains and who?
Right. Well, I say I've always been intrigued by witchcraft and witches and sorcerers. And the thing I've noticed is that, with very few exceptions, the emphasis is always on the witch hunters, the trials, and the like, but they don't really go into who the people were and what they were supposed to do. They just say, you know, wicked witch burned here, wicked witches burnt, hanged there, whatever. And so I thought I'd, you know, put a little bit of mini biography to the details of it. And I say I think there's about 350 or so witches and sorcerers mentioned, and there's mini biographies of about 240 of them.
Are they all UK? Are they all UK, or?
They are the historical, very historical ones, sort of the biblical ones, the Witch of Endor, things like that. They obviously are not UK, but the rest of them, with a few European exceptions, the rest are either UK or North American, because obviously the Salem witch trials, and, you know, going back to the story we mentioned at the opening about the two carvings of the witches, the trial that followed, and they were convicted and hanged, was taken down and noted in great detail, and was then used by the American prosecutors during the Salem witch trials. And they had this idea of spectral evidence, which is basically, if you stood up in court and said, that wicked witch came to me in the night in my dreams and pinched me and hit me, that was classed as evidence, and that was accepted. And you know, it's quite preposterous by modern standards.
Absolutely.
You know, it's not just hearsay, it's just fantasy hearsay, if you like. But the Bury St Edmund case set the template, and that was one of the allegations that the young girls who were behind most of the allegations in the Salem trials, that was what they came out with. And, you know, oh, he came to me in the night and terrified me, and he's a witch and must be hanged. And so, you know, it carried over from, you know, a relatively, you know, the story of the Lowestoft witches is like a lot of witch witchcraft trials. Really quite sad, because it's a couple of widows who've fallen on hard times, and they're a bit of an annoyance to their neighbors, and they're often begging for cheap food or bargains or whatever. And it blew out of hand, and they were accused of witchcraft. I mean, one of the things they were accused of was one of the witches supposedly told a neighbor that the chimney stack was going to fall down on his roof, and lo and behold, it fell down. Therefore, it was the witch that did it. Whereas, common sense says, well, if you've got a dangerous chimney stack,
absolutely,
any fool can see it's in a dangerous state.
Absolutely. I mean, can I interject there?
Indeed, it's your show.
Oh, it's my show. Oh, I do love you, Charles. Stop throwing me off like that. I'm trying to look professional on the Isle of Wight. With these two ladies, as you said, I mean, most of the witch stories that I'm aware of, and I'm not a researcher like yourself, but I've delved in along the decades I've been here, or centuries. And I found myself in most of the cases, it was very similar to these two poor widows. This is what happened. However, there were many tales that come up that after the fact, like when they were literally tortured and burnt to death, it was found it was either another woman would like the husband of the so-called witch, or something personal. Did you find this as well? That the reasons people were identified as witches wasn't because we're fully aware that witches were really healers, mediums, and they would forage the herbs and heal. So they got burnt at the stake for doing that. But there are cases, are there not, of like nefarious cases where one female may actually wish to marry a certain female or something like that. Did you find that?
A lot of that. I would say that the number of genuine healers who were prosecuted and hanged, and should be said that quite a few were prosecuted but then let off, or with a fine, or told not to do it again. But the number of people who we'd say were wise women and healers was actually very few. Most of the people were just unpopular, largely old women, because they were a bit of a drain on the community. Their families didn't want to bother looking after them. Some of them had, you find this in one of the poor women who was hanged during the Pendle witch trials. She was a wealthy woman in her own right, and just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And the only motivation seems to have been that if she was convicted, her property would be confiscated, and the person who would benefit would be the sheriff of the county, who would either sell it off to his mates or keep it for himself, or do some kind of deal and take a margin on it. So there were lots of vested interests in it. And they, time and time again, these are lonely old women, so they've got nobody to stand up for them, who are a nuisance. And we forget just how much poverty there was there, and if you weren't able to work, there was no welfare state, not even any food kitchens or anything for you. And so they were resorting to begging, and people used to get fed up with them. And sometimes the women would rather foolishly, and it was nearly always women, I should hasten to add, probably 85% of all those who were executed were women.
That's where we're going to come in and say, I don't want to be seen to be sexist here. Do we have any male wizards or magicians, and what's the male side?
The male side, there were some, and some of them were executed, but we do tend to have a slightly strange, again, very sexist situation that poor old women, they get the short straw and are taken away and hanged,
Yeah.
whereas the men generally were dabbling in more ritual magic and alchemy and things of that nature,
Ah.
and they often they often got off because they were useful. I mean, someone like John Dee,
Oh, yes.
who is famous in the Elizabethan times, he was
Yeah.
primarily an alchemist. He's known
Yeah.
to have tried necromancy,
Yeah.
raising people from the dead to question them and so on.
Yeah.
And he had a bit of an obsession with, he called it Enochian magic, and he wanted to
Yes.
know the language of angels and so on.
Yes.
But
Yes.
he was primarily an alchemist, and Queen Elizabeth, his main patron, she
Mm.
wanted gold. And
Mhm.
anybody who could apparently come up with some way of
Mm.
bringing out gold, that was something she wanted to support. So although in other circumstances he would have was doing things that would have got him hanged,
Yeah.
because he was doing alchemy, he was given a get out of jail free
Because,
card.
well, it reminds me because there was a tale I heard about him that um, he when he told her to set sail, I don't know if it was the Spanish Armada or whatever, and he was skiring, and he said, "Don't do this, do that, do this," and it all worked out to plan. That's very similar to the lady saying your chimney's going to fall down,
Yeah,
and it did. It's similar, but however, maybe because he was a male, and maybe because it was for the Queen. Who knows? I mean, I
yeah,
suggest that's why they got away with it. So we can say a lot of hypocrisy there. Never mind genocide.
yeah.
But
Well, if you go way back
mm,
to ancient times,
mhm,
and the um, people of Chaldea,
yeah,
Ur of the Chaldees,
yeah,
we're going a long way back.
yeah,
All of those cultures had a thing whereby the priests, dabbled in magic, but
yeah,
they were the official priests of the city state, the cult. So
mhm,
they were the good guys, if you like,
yeah,
and anything they did was for the benefit of the
mhm,
population.
mhm,
But anybody else who dabbled in it, any form of um, forecasting, prophecy, prophesying, anything of that nature, they were persecuted. And it just tended to be that it was the males who were the priests. There were no women priests.
yeah,
And it was the women who were the seers and the clairvoyants. And they were prosecuted and the males weren't.
yeah,
And follows through, through a lot of cultures, that the male establishment have, if you like, official state sanctioned
yeah.
magicians, and they're the good guys, but anybody else is a bad guy. And
Could we say though? I mean, I'm trying to think about the Oracle of Delphi. That was a female. Back, if we go way back, way back again,
yeah,
when I was a child, the Oracle of Delphi, she was female, and there were many others like her, weren't they?
there were most of the oracles, and there were about half a dozen famous
Yeah,
ones in
mhm,
ancient times.
yeah,
Delphi is the most best known,
yes,
but there were other
yes.
ones. They were almost all women.
Oh,
They did tend to get they didn't have a very good life expectancy. I think once they stopped being able to perform properly, they sort of disappeared and
oh,
taken
I'm,
away and replaced. But I say it's the men weren't generally, and it was
yeah,
very much um, higher magic is something that men do. Um,
mm,
Lower magic, and there are even terms for high magic
yeah,
and lower
yeah,
magic.
yeah,
Lower magic is something women do, and it's a bit,
yes,
it's also the men were talking to angels, whereas the women were talking to demons,
yeah.
and
It's the
one's
way
good
they
and one's
portray
bad.
it. Yeah, I'm with you.
And
However, I'm happy to say, Charles, today the women are out there with their priestesses are there, as
yeah,
well as the wizards or whatever the name is today. We've got the balance back as it should be, especially with alchemy in itself. I've got to ask you, over the hundreds of stories that you have in your new book coming out, for you, which was the most fascinating, or one or two of them, the most fascinating? Like when you were doing the research and putting it together, you're like, wow. I mean, maybe one you didn't even know about before until you'd done the research.
There's so many of them, but I was intrigued by Isabel Goody. She was the Scottish witch, and there's a good possibility, this was in the 17th century, that she actually wasn't executed, because at that time there was actually a law that anybody who was thought to be insane, even if they confessed, would not be convicted. And she voluntarily confessed. She sort of turned up and said, "Hey, you're looking for witches. Let me tell me my story."
Yeah.
And she brings in lots of spells. I think she, in Scotland, is the largest source of spells of any of the witches.
Wow.
She also brings in the idea of the land of fairy, the fairy queen,
Yeah.
that they, or elf queen in Elfland, that tend to use the terms interchangeably, that
Yeah.
witches used to commune with them and meet them.
Mm-hmm.
And I say it's a lot of the stuff we have about what witches do
Mm-hmm.
comes from her and her
Yeah.
description of it. So she clearly knew what she was doing, but whether it was she just had a really good imagination,
Mm-hmm.
or whether she was, I don't know, attention seeking, and once she had an audience she couldn't really stop herself.
Mm-hmm.
But I say fascinating amount. I
I
mean,
mean, I even heard about her as a child.
yeah.
That her. She's the one that I have numerous places. We, obviously as a child we play our own games with the fairies and everything, as you do. I don't know about you, Charles, but that's what I did. And she came up many times. Or it could be, I've got to stand up here for mediums. Vote. She could
Hmm.
have been a medium, a psychic medium, but
Yep.
terminology wasn't in context
Yeah.
back in the day. I mean, they called them witches or demons or devils, but she could have been a 100% kosher medium that was able to do this.
It's quite possible. It's quite possible. And indeed, with some of the tales, it's quite clear with modern eyes that the
Mm,
person had some kind of psychic medium
yeah,
powers.
yeah,
And again, in right through till Queen Elizabeth's time, who she kept to control, there was a lot of concern about clairvoyance forecasting the future
yeah,
for political reasons.
yeah,
It was one of the things you definitely would be executed for, but on the grounds of treason. If
yes,
you said, "I foresee that in the next 12 months the king will die,"
yeah,
didn't matter whether it was true, or whether there were obvious reasons, like you suddenly noticed the king was hobbling around on sticks and looking really ill.
yeah,
But such things were regarded as treasonous, because that would affect the stability of the kingdom. And if the king is going to die, then, if there
I'm with
isn't a
you.
clear succession, and a lot of the time in
Yeah,
the Middle Ages in England, there wasn't a clear succession, and
no,
there were lots of brothers and cousins and things.
absolutely. And
And so
illegitimate.
exactly, you were
Yeah.
endangering the throne. So,
Let me
um,
jump in. Let me jump in there. But that looks basically that is part of remote viewing and how governments today do remote viewing, and they secretly, and mediums were the ones that would do remote viewing, and now you can train in remote viewing.
mm,
It's looking at the disparity between one era and this era, because that's that sort of a, you can remote view to predict a future timeline. And I find it wonderful that after so much, since the 17th century till now, or the 21st, again, now it's free. Everyone can remote view. All of these things that were taboo back in the day. So I'm going to put it back and slightly digress and say to you, because I've heard many reasons why witches and warlocks and wizards and Merlins were executed. Was it truly or solely down to the Catholic Church, or was there another nefarious reason that all of a sudden they were executed and burnt and seeked out viciously, as we know, with the trials?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's an interesting bit that from the end of the Roman period through I'm talking about the United Kingdom, from the end of the Roman period through to about the later 15th century, the 1400s, the number of people who were executed for witchcraft or sorcery was probably just dozens, very few. And then
we got a frozen Charles.
Yes. And it transforms and it becomes mass murder. And I say in the UK, Scotland were worse. There were far more executions in Scotland than there were in England. But in continental Europe, particularly in Germany, they were vicious. And, you have reports of some villages and towns. There was probably nobody left. They'd all been taken away. I think there's two things that struck me. One is the starting point is the publication of the book Malleus Maleficum, which is the Hammer of the Witches. And that was written by a Catholic priest. And looking at his life history and reports of him, you can now see he was somebody who quite clearly had a big issue with women. Freudian of some sort, perhaps his mother rejected him, but he was obsessed with it. And a lot of his book became the handbook for how to do it. And he was the first to promulgate the idea that because witches are in league with the devil, you can't believe anything they say. So you must torture them, because that's the only way you'll get the truth out of them. If you just let them give a confession, those are just the devil's lies. So you must do it, and that they must be tricked and cruelly treated, and that they were in league in the devil. Before that, the connection between the devil and witchcraft really didn't exist. They knew people had these magical powers, but they didn't see it as the devil. Once you bring the devil into it, we're talking the Christian religion here.
Christianity.
Once you bring in there, then you're into the realms of heresy, attacking the church, and it all becomes a lot more serious. I say, and his book unfortunately coincided with the start of printing. So what would have just been a manuscript that would have had to have been laboriously copied by hand suddenly became something that was printed, and it was a bestseller. It went through something like 20 editions over the next 100 years. It was a hugely popular book all across Europe. And
can I just interject there? I mean, do you have an estimate? Does anyone have an estimate how many poor souls were massacred? Women, by the way. Any estimate at all? Has anyone done this?
The figures have been debated for quite a long time, because some of the earlier figures put it into hundreds of thousands, if not millions. But now it's realized that there simply couldn't have been that many deaths because the population wasn't that big.
No, no.
It would have had, and a lot of the records aren't as good as they should be, but current estimates put it somewhere between about a low of 45,000 and a high of about 80,000, with a probability of about 60,000. And this is across Europe and North America,
I'm with you.
and including England. I say in England, it's just over about 100 or so. It's quite a low figure. Scotland was a lot higher, about 2,000, 3,000 or so. And interestingly,
was that because of Queen Mary? Do you think?
No, it wasn't. This is the other thing I found intriguing. There was no difference between whether the prosecutors were in a Catholic state or a Protestant state. However, those that were more extreme Puritan, and the Scottish were very much that way inclined. The Kirk wasn't just a church, it was the center of the community.
I'm with you.
And they had a far more extreme black and white approach towards it. And they also allowed torture, which was relatively rare in England. So they prosecuted a lot more. I mean, you were talking earlier about, people scoring, having personal reasons for doing it and denouncing. The Scottish had a system where in the kirk there would be a chest, big wooden box with a slot in the top, and people could write a denunciation on it anonymously and pop it in the box.
Oh my gosh.
And so you got a lot of people who scored points against people they didn't like, people who they thought had done them out of business for some reason. And, it was just pure anonymous tittle tattle.
I mean, when you think about it, I mean, this may not be the best analogy, but, if we have a nice serial killer that goes on the rampage and over like 4 decades, kills 150, say, women, you're not forgiven. You're hunted down and you're held accountable for your actions. And it just seems the church has never even been questioned or made accountable for. And I suppose it's never going to happen. But it just shows you what, no matter just UK, anywhere in the world where church and state rule the people, there is no accountability for this. I call it mass genocide. It's a mass genocide of a people. However, they will accuse other states of doing mass genocide and, and invade and all that. So when you look, I love looking back at history, Charles, because you can see the hypocrisy and you can see it's still going on today, but thank God, not on mediums here. You can still see that. And there never seems to be a justice for the ancestors, all that they had to endure. The fact that you could pop my name in a box and say Gloria's a witch, and when they tortured them, it wasn't, the word torture doesn't even do it. It was absolutely painstakingly long until you died torture. It was horrific torture.
A lot, and a lot of people did die during the torture.
Absolutely.
Or there's quite a few cases in Scotland where people actually hanged themselves or killed themselves in prison to avoid the continuous torture.
Going through it. And you just look at, I don't know how they could. I suppose the only way they could get people to convert from, let's say, paganism is to fear the fact that that was going to happen to them or anything like that. But I mean, from a faith that says it's loving and kind and God loves you and all the rest of that, you do that to another human being. I mean, it's way out of my comprehension. I today in the 21st century, I can't comprehend such, and I can't. It doesn't even compute to me. To me, it was the barbarity of what they did. It was horrific. However,
Yeah.
we must move slightly off that one now, because I'll go on one on my podium. You know what I'm like, and I'll be going like this. I won't do that now. I mean, your other books. You've got the you said the ebook on Amazon. Is it? Is it in what have you got on Amazon? Your book?
Well, I've got the book about creative writing, which is really a bit outside the scope of this.
I'm with you.
Talk.
I'm with you. However, I'm going to ask you with the reason I've raised this is that with your background, where you came from and where you've ended up, how did you get into creative writing? Because it is a beautiful art in itself.
I suppose it was, I grew up in a book culture. We'd read books at home, and we'd all sit around and read different books, and I still do, and I'm a great consumer of books, and I was a journalist, so I was writing there, and it's an old corny saying that every journalist has a book in them somewhere. It might not be a very good book, but they've got a book in them. And so I took an interest in, spent my life writing about nonfiction. But I've also been interested in fiction. And it really was moving on from there on. What makes a good book? Why do some books work and why do some books don't work? And that's what really the 12 rules is, looking at the aspects you must have if you're putting together a novel that will mean people will stay with you. Because, I mean, I'm sure you've taken out books from the library or downloaded them, and after a few pages, you go, I don't care.
You put it down. No, you put it down. And see, this is why I raised it, because the show's not just about the things I love to talk about and yourself, the current topics, witches, mediums, and myths, and that. It's if there's any inspiring book writers out there, if you can get, and you're looking at, you want the 12 steps or purchase. Is it purchasable on Amazon or?
Yeah, it's on Amazon Kindle, and it's very reasonably priced. I think it's $1.99 or something like that.
There you go.
And it's only a short book, but again, it's 12 points, and I say it's getting things across. Like, I have done a bit of work with authors where they've sent me their manuscripts and said, what do you think of it? And it's picking up on some of the things they have done, where something improbable happens and it completely destroys the mystique of it. And so it's setting all the basis, not of the plotting, but how to make your whole book credible. And one of the things I stress is that your villains need to be credible. They can't just be evil. What made them evil? What's the background? So the a good example would be Dracula. There's the long story about him and the background to him. But you read other books and the person is just evil for the sake of being evil. Well, that doesn't really happen. There's something there, and in some instances they had terrible time as children, child abuse or whatever, and they've got issues. Certainly when you look at in real life the backgrounds of serial killers, most of them come from a problem background, problem youth. They don't just one day say, I think I'll go and cut.
No, they don't. People. I mean, that was part of my past career, criminology. I'm fully aware of that. So for me, I mean, that it's very cheap, a couple of pound, guys. If you're an inspiring writer, I mean, I have one daughter. She's a script writer. She for TV. However, I remember way back in the day, she went to university and she had to pay for her creative writing just to give her the structure. and it costs a fortune. I thought I'd raise it for anyone watching the show who's inspiring to write. The 12
Yeah.
steps is there. Charles Christian on Amazon. I just thought I'd throw that one in for you.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's called Writing Genre Fiction, Creating Imaginary Worlds, the
Right.
12 rules.
Brilliant.
And I say it's all those things to make it plausible.
Yeah.
And it sort of dwells on the fact that you know, Sherlock Holmes, which are most of them are short stories, there's an image that's immediately there. There's a world that you can sort of sink into.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need lots of minute detail or whatever. There's just something about it, and it's plausible, and it all hangs together.
Yes.
And it's that, how do you create that world that you fit into, and you can suspend disbelief. That's the whole thing with fiction, that you get into the world, particularly if you're talking fantasy and science fiction.
Yeah.
You get into that world and it all makes sense, and you carry along for the ride. And even though there's a bit in your logical brain saying, well, we don't have faster than light travel, but it doesn't matter. You don't need to, it's not a science textbook. You've just got it for the purpose of this book. And
I tell you, I love fantasy. I love myth, fables, and I'm one of these people now in my maturity, 200 years old now. It feels like it today. Is I flipped it. All the mythology and the fables I'm saying are not that. They are all true. And I love fantasy. I love stories of fairies or witches, and I've recently sort of become aware that many others are getting interested back into this sort of field. Have you found that at all? This type of, unless it's just us females.
No, it's big with men as well. No, I think it's going on from strength to strength. I mean, it's an odd one because a lot of people just don't get it and don't read fantasy or science fiction because they don't get it. And that's fine. You can't make somebody enjoy it, but for those who do, there's a huge world of readers and writers out there catering for it, and it also carries over into online gaming. Huge amount of that, and the spin-offs, and huge amount of movies. And you look at the series that are being produced by Amazon and the like, they're going to be coming out with a new version of Lord of the Rings, a sort of prequel version. They've recently been carrying the Wheel of Time series. We've done the first series of it. There's a huge demand for it.
I think there is. I mean, I got to say, on Prime, I think it's Prime, I'm sure it's Prime, there was someone told me about it, and it's called Tales from the Loop.
Yes.
Oh my God, I fell in. Have you seen it?
I've seen some of them, yeah.
Oh, and especially the first episode, like, wow. And when I look at how it's all changing now, and also with podcasting, shows like myself, I think I've got a strange feeling humanity's a bit fed up with this reality, and we're getting out of it. We're making our own.
I think it is. I think it is. That there's, sort of, again, looking at history, that it does go in swings and roundabouts. And when times are good, people are happy to live in the now. But when times are hard and bad, and we are going through a bad period at the moment. We've had the pandemic for 2 years. We've had the economy tanking and not doing very much in the UK. We've got an awful war in Europe.
So what are we going to do? We're not going to. We're going to find another timeline, another narrative, another reality. because reality is what you make it, whatever you put your
We
attention.
want to escape from this grim reality we're in here.
And
We
we
want
can change it. It's how change your perception, everything changes. I mean, this is why I find this topic fascinating. I mean, I run some groups and that, and all the people in my groups, bar one man, all mediums or
yeah,
witches or soothsayers, whatever you want to call them.
yeah,
And I'm telling you, it's just growing exponentially. And wherever I go, every time I meet someone, you're talking, and then you find out they're into this similar field, and the witches or the healers or the those that work with the land, the herbs, like our ancestors that were burnt at the stake. Such a
mm,
variety. They're talking of the fae. They're talking of these elementals and the leprechauns. I'm still scared of the leprechauns, being Irish. Still, my father told me I was a changeling, so there you go. So I may not be even be human. Who knows? But it's like magic, and that magic, I think, it's got such a beautiful energy and
yeah,
curiosity, and it's wonderful to read things like that or to watch them. Tales of the Loop, I totally understood, especially episode 1, because of quantum physics. Now,
hmm,
isn't that weird? If I hadn't studied the quantum physics, I wouldn't have got the shift, how
yeah,
the time travel worked. And that was like, wow. And so these programs, you're right, are being made now. And
yeah.
yourself, the books that you're bringing out, there are other authors that are doing the same. I've got to say on the back of that, what is your next project?
Right. Well, obviously waiting for the proofs back and edits and things on the witch book. There's two. I'm dabbling with a novel at the moment,
Uh-huh.
but it's not going too well. I'm very critical of it, and you know that phrase they use in creative writing, kill
Yeah,
all your darlings, not to
yeah,
get obsessed
yeah,
with your own characters and
yeah.
the plot, because you may think it's wonderful, but that doesn't mean anybody else will. And I think I've hit that point where the darlings have taken over and really it's not going anywhere. So that's in the air.
Yeah.
Next non-fiction book I'd like to do would be something on pirates and mutineers.
Oh, yeah,
Again, covering the whole from earliest times through to modern times, but with a big focus on the golden age of piracy, as
I mean,
which,
that
which
is
again is the 17th century and early 18th century.
absolutely. But there again, I suppose what will cross there will be fact and fiction because they're fact. Okay,
Yeah,
Johnny Depp, that's fiction. Okay,
yeah,
guys? As much as I wish it wasn't.
yeah.
However, but you've got the myth, the stories, but you've got the reality. These pirates were nothing like Johnny Depp, were they not?
No, but they as you say, there's the myth and there's the reality, because you've got someone like Captain Morgan,
Yeah.
who people now think of as rum.
Yes.
But he was a real person, but
Yeah.
most fictional depictions of pirates will have Captain Morgan in there because he
Yeah.
was such an important player in it. And the pirates had their brethren of the coast, as they called it, and
Yeah.
they set up pirate democracies, and
Oh
the
gosh.
way they ran their ships,
Yeah.
and they had codes that you followed, and you
Yeah.
must share all the money out, and it was then shared out. Any plunder was put in the collected together and then shared out on various series of proportions and so
Yeah.
on. And they had disciplinary measures, and if people didn't like the captain and there was a vote, they could depose the captain and appoint
Wow, I
another
didn't know
captain.
that.
And so and they ran an island, one of the ones in the Pacific Indian Ocean,
Mm.
near Mauritius, and they also had an island off Cuba called Tortuga, and they ran it as an independent pirate republic, so
Wow.
there's a lot more than haha me hearties and walk the plank
Yeah.
on it.
I mean, that would be an interesting book. I'd find that interesting because, as we said, it's never really been, I don't know if it has, but I'm just making this statement in the air. I've never seen any book that really goes into detail about the reality of pirates, what they were really like, I never knew they run a democracy. There you go. Your book is needed. I'm going to have to ask you, though, did the UK have any famous pirates? Well, I'm Irish. Did the Irish have any famous pirates?
The Irish had Mary Bonny, the woman pirate. She was Irish. I'm sure she was.
I've heard her name, yeah.
And
One for women again.
Yep, she was more than just a pirate's moll. She took part in fights and carried pistols and was villainous. And I think she avoided getting hanged by the expediency of being pregnant. And there was a rule at the time: you couldn't hang pregnant women. And I think she got away with that one. But no, we a lot of the pirates were of English origin.
Yeah.
Probably the best known would be Captain Kidd, who historical character, and he's that grey area between privateers, which were basically state licensed pirates.
Yeah.
So their job was to go out and raid ships of the enemy and mercenaries and bring back booty for the Queen. That's how Francis Drake earned his living. He was basically a privateer, and
he was a pirate. Yes,
he was a pirate. Yeah. He was a pirate to the enemy, but to Queen Elizabeth, who was benefiting from all the gold he brought in.
Oh God,
he was a privateer. Yeah. The thing was, if the war ended, you were no longer fighting, then if you still attacked the enemy, yesterday's enemy, then you suddenly slipped over into piracy. And Captain Kidd made this mistake. Though it's also thought there were sort of political maneuverings and possibly he knew too much. So he was convicted and hanged. And there's lots of famous line drawings of him being hung execution dock in London's Docklands.
Wow.
It was where they were all hanged, and then they would be stuck on gibbets in the either on the riverbanks or actually in the water. So as the water would rise up and over them with the tides.
I'm with you. I mean, the barbarity. I can't even say the word now. There. I mean, funny thing is, whilst I've been traveling the island here, going through different areas and being guided and shown this happened, witches. Oh yes, here. And when you go, you look at the history and what happened in the past, and you're standing exactly where these events took place. It's like, I can't believe in our day that such. Oh, I can't even go there. And when you go to these places, the energy of the massacres, of the deaths, of the torture, and it's like, oh my God, how did they get away with it? I still can't comprehend that, and maybe I never will, because it's not within me to even resonate with such a thing. But we do need to hear the true history. Our history has been hidden and forbidden for a very long time. So I'm loving that authors today are coming with a neutral approach, not a political, not a religious, because in the past it was either, but with a neutral place. I tell you what, before we close the show, you've covered areas of myths and magics and the land's magical. Have you become more of a believer in magic or alchemy or the fae or the leprechauns? Since doing your research, have you become more open-minded that there is a possibility?
I think I probably have. I think I'm recognizing there's a balance between being, if not being rude here, but not being a Kool-Aid drinker that believes anything,
Yeah, I know.
that,
Yeah.
give an example. You hear a fluttering and a hooting in the night when you're walking on a country lane. That's an owl. That's not,
Yeah.
that is the most likely explanation.
It's not a Yeti.
Yeah, it's not a Yeti. It's not
No.
necessarily a vampire or a ghost or
Yeah.
anything like
Yeah.
that. So there's, there's that side of it,
Yeah.
which you do meet people who you think, no, sorry, you're just obsessed. And then there's the complete skeptic, non-believer, debunker. And I
Yeah.
think I've come over into the middle to
Yeah.
accept that the world is a lot more complicated than
Yes.
we think.
Yes.
And just because we don't have scientific, in quotes, proof of something that either exists or doesn't exist, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means that we don't know about it and we haven't understood it. I mean, to go back to ancient history, you'll have lots of people who will say the pyramids, Stonehenge, they were built by aliens. How did people in those times do it? Well, the answer is we don't know how they did it, but that doesn't mean they needed aliens to do it. That just means that we haven't got their technology. There's lots of things,
there's many things. I'm in agreement. I don't think you should dismiss something just because you haven't experienced it yourself. However, if you have personally experienced something yourself, and I'm not talking the addicted ones, then you cannot deny your experience. And I think if you stay, even myself as a medium, I'm in the neutral zone for everything. I will say, is it a bird? Is it a plane? Is it Superman? I'll go through everything first. And then I say, okay, then maybe it's not. I don't know what it is, but it's not something known. And I don't have a problem with that. But I'm a very healthy skeptic. Hold on, I just want to say Watchers Talk before we finish. Hi, Watchers Talk. Hi, Omar. I agree we are quick to give ET credit. I think it was humans that built everything. Well, there you go. Everyone's got a different truth. Thank you, Omar. And it doesn't matter. No one's right, no one's wrong. I tell you why, because we don't know. We don't have the proof, so we don't know. So it could be humans, it could be ET, it could be anything. It could be them dreaded leprechauns and the fae that we don't know, do we? We just don't know. I think it's wonderful to have a discourse and a discussion where we can all talk about it, but not think, well, I'm right and you're wrong. To be neutral, don't you agree, Charles? On topics like this. And just be fascinated with it.
Exactly. And you were mentioning quantum physics earlier and the Tales from the Loop.
Oh,
I mean, that is where science is moving into the realms of magic. It's almost impossible to define it in the type of physics I was taught at school.
No,
it doesn't make sense at all. So, you're then coming back round. Has magic always existed? But in olden times, it was said it was because you had the devil or the fae helping you. Well, now we're realizing actually there's this weird stuff happening, but it's quantum physics that's doing it.
Yes, there you go. It's explaining the magic, the alchemy. It's now we're getting hardcore math. It's math. It's all math.
Yeah.
Explaining it. The evidence is coming, and I find that fascinating. Not just with the Tales of the Loop, which was really a visual. It was visually quantum physics, and I'm a visual learner. Me, if I'm visualizing, I resonate better. But quantum physics now is really, to me, is supporting the myths, the magic.
Mm, mm,
All things are possible,
yeah,
all times, in all places. I mean, we have the magical stories, like bilocation, yeah, the
yeah,
bilocation. All these tales that a wizard was here and a wizard was there. But now in quantum physics, with a particle, you can scratch one here simultaneously over there on the other side of the world.
yeah,
It will react and respond. Quantum physics is proving
yeah.
magic. I love
And
it. I love
alchemy, the quest to
it.
turn base metals into gold. Well,
Yes,
atomic particle science can do that. The only
yes,
disadvantage is it's hugely expensive.
yes,
It's cheaper to go and buy gold than it is
yes.
to run it through a particle accelerator. But
Yeah,
it does exist. It's not impossible. You
no, and
break it
it's
down,
true.
but there is a scientific, physical reason for it. It's not hocus pocus. I wave my magic
Yeah.
wand and it becomes gold.
Well,
Um,
can I add
it's
one to that? Can I add
yeah,
one, Charles?
yeah,
It's like being a medium is, I talk to dead people and they don't like to be called dead because they're not dead. But I
mhm,
have to use that phrase for anyone that's not quite sure. Well, people would say, you can't do that way back in the day, especially when I was a child. I was told I had
mm,
schizophrenia and medicated for it. But quantum physics has proven energy cannot die.
mm,
So I say, well, where does it go? Where does your grandmother go? If you
mm,
don't, where energy cannot die, it's still here. So
yeah,
for me, quantum physics has flipped everything on its head. And
yeah,
I think we're starting to see it seeping through. You're right, on the shows, on the new programs coming out. I mean, people may not like this, but Harry Potter, it all started in that era when the Harry Potter film was come out and the Marvel, all of that was the beginning of it.
mm,
Now we're really getting into films like Tales of the Loop. I highly recommend you go and watch Tales of the Loop because it is amazing
yeah.
what we're now producing. I mean, you should write a book like that, Charles. You bestseller, you could do that. You
Mm,
know you could do it. You know you could do it. I'm so naughty with you. Okay, before we close, Charles, I thank you so much. I've had you on Inception podcast, and thank you for coming on to Open Minds. And I do hope you'll come back in the future, especially
definitely.
when the book's being, published.
Yeah,
We can
yeah,
push that out there and share ideas, or just
yeah.
have an organic conversation about topics we both love dearly. But before we go, please remind the audience where they can get a hold of you or your books, and especially the 12 steps in creative
Yeah.
writing. Yeah,
Right.
please let
Well,
us know.
I write as Charles Christian, and you can find me on Amazon as Charles Christian, and you'll find all my books there. But you can also find me on my website, which is urbanfantasist.com. And that has links to everything, including my social media, and you can
Mm-hmm.
contact me, and you can take it from there. But everything goes on there, and indeed, when Gloria sends me a link to this show, that'll be going up there as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you can find me.
Don't
And
forget the YouTube. Don't forget the YouTube channel.
well, the YouTube channel is also linked on there, but that's
Brilliant.
Weird Tales Show. So that's go to YouTube and just look for Weird Tales, and you'll
Do it.
find my shows.
Yeah, it's excellent. I got addicted. I had to stop. Thank you so much, sweetie, for being on the show. And
My pleasure. My pleasure.
look forward to speaking with you again. And thank you, Omar, on Watchers Talk, another podcaster. He says, thank you, Gloria and Charles. Wonderful conversation. Yes,
Thank you, Omar.
it was wonderful. I'm Gloria. This is Open Minds Chat Show. Until the next time, it's bye from me.